Welcome everyone to Tennessee Turf Tuesday. This is our May edition for 2023. My name is Jim Brosnan. I'm one of your hosts here. This is the fourth year that we've done Turf Tuesdays, and these have been really fun for myself and my colleagues to bring people on from different universities and different parts of the industry to talk about topics of interest. And today will be no different. We've got a great guest today to talk about not only the World Cup that just concluded, but the collaboration between Michigan State and Tennessee moving forward to the next World Cup that will be happening. Before we get into that, as I do for all these, I'm going to just do a little bit of business. Pesticide credits I know are of interest to almost everybody who's with us today. All of the information that you need for pesticide credits in your state has already been captured. It was captured at registration. So when you signed up for today's webinar, you were asked to indicate whether you wanted pesticide credits, and if so, what state you wanted them in and what your license number was. All of that will be used to populate the rosters that will be sent to your state departments of agriculture, and we have several states that have awarded this session pesticide accreditation. So if you are interested in pesticide credits, you are all set. There is no action needed on your end. For our golf course superintendents that are with us today, you'll see at the end of the session, there'll be your code for the GCSAA to enter into their website. I'll put that up as we conclude our session just before 12:30 Eastern time. So you'll be covered there. And then last but not least, for questions, you'll see at the bottom of the screen a Q&A box, and we ask that you use this Q&A box to ask any questions during our time together. It's more efficient for us. We can kind of thread questions and answers together. We're going to do our best to answer as many of those live as we can in the time that we have. And if for some reason we don't touch on one, we will try to type it in via text and get that covered. So I think that covers all the particulars. As I mentioned, in the opening, most of these sessions have focused on some pest related issues, and certainly we'll touch on pest management today in the discussion, but we have a unique opportunity to talk about a collaboration between two universities, Tennessee and Michigan State, about maybe the most noteworthy sporting event in the world, the FIFA World Cup. So I'm gonna kick this over to my colleague John Sorokin, and he knows Dr. Rogers from Michigan State, who's with us today, pretty well. And I'm gonna let you guys start in 1994 and get us to present day when it comes to World Cup. Go.
Good to see you too, Brandon. Thanks, Jim. When you say 1994, it was actually, I think it was a little over 31 years ago that Trey, you hired me to as an undergrad, just graduating from the 2-year program at Michigan State. I came to Michigan State in 91 wanting to be in the golf course architecture, get into construction, and maybe be a superintendent. And a little project in 94 for the World Cup you had going on that you started in 92. And I asked if I could work for you. And you said, yes, go see John Steyer. And that's where I got introduced to John Steyer, and kind of went from there. And it's kind of hard to believe it was 31 years ago that I started to do that for you.
We're all getting old, man.
Time flies, that's for sure.
And and Brandon was just started on as a grad student at Michigan State right around then, a year, probably 94 you started, right, Brandon?
Yeah, I was in 94.
So we built that, and who knew that 31 years later we would be sitting here doing the same thing for what this World Cup coming up in 2026 is going to be the largest World Cup ever. The one that just ended in Qatar, they estimated that 5.4 or 5.8 billion people tuned in to the World Cup on television. So that's big when we think 300 million people watched the Super Bowl. That's 2/3 of the world was tuned into this. But in 2022, it was 32 nations, and it's going to expand to 48 countries. And in Qatar, they had 8 stadiums that were 46 miles apart. Wow. So it's pretty easy to do that World Cup. We've got in this World Cup, we've got 16 stadiums that are 4,900 kilometers or 3,200 miles apart. So that's a big difference from 9,000 feet in Mexico City to sea level at Vancouver, and a temp indoors in Vancouver to outdoors in Seattle to sea level in Miami with hot climate. So then there's 5 dome stadiums that we've been charged to do for this World Cup. And it's gone back since 2017 when I first talked to Mr. Alan Ferguson with FIFA about this. And as this ballooned into what was going to be the World Cup, I thought, Trey and I, it's a big project. It's more than one university could handle, and Michigan State University and University of Tennessee seemed like a logical fit to bring back the knowledge of what happened before. John Steyer, I know, is not on here, but he's really active with us doing this as well. But there's going to be all sorts of things from weed control, disease control in these dome stadiums that were going on.
So yeah, John, for those who might not be, those who are listening that might not be familiar, can you walk maybe the audience through what Michigan State and Tennessee have been charged to do? I mean, my understanding from a little bit of the outside looking in is that you and Trey are working collaboratively, kind of under a banner of, you have all these stadiums for the World Cup that's coming to the Americas in 2026. And you kind of have to have them all play the same, right? From a performance and safety standpoint. And there's a ton of hurdles in that, as you just alluded to, with geography and whether it's a dome or not a dome. Is that kind of the main aim of the project?
Right. And I'll let Trey chime in on this, but they will not play on artificial turf. So World Cup at the highest level has to play on grass. The 16 stadiums that have been selected, half of them are currently artificial turf. And of those 8 that are artificial turf, 5 are indoors. So the challenge that we've been charged with at University of Tennessee and Michigan State is, how do we make 16 stadiums that we know are in completely different climatic kind of conditions or micro environments play the same for player to surface interactions, whether they're running and cutting, to the ball bounce and ball roll, because we know that, unlike it's a ball to surface sport as well, that's vital. So that's the charge that's been put on to us by FIFA to kind of figure out. Trey, yeah.
Well, I also think that one of the big differences between the first time that we got involved in '94, the FIFA was just the entity, and the host country was in charge of putting together everything. So the state of Michigan actually ended up supporting a whole lot of the research that was necessary. I see a lot of parallels to what we're doing now, except the differences are that FIFA has kind of changed the way they do things, and they're kind of supporting the research that's necessary to try to, get through this. Also, as you know, John, FIFA really doesn't know this country. Alan Ferguson doesn't know it very well. The people that are with him don't know it very well. And the more that they get to learn about this tiger by the tail that they've grabbed, the more that they're realizing that this is a big, big project. And, we've spoken a lot about the stadiums, but as you know, when we have our weekly calls, we also eventually start talking about all the training sites that have not necessarily been identified by FIFA yet, but they'll be close to, about 100 of them by the time we're done, and maybe even a few more, depending on how you do your math. So there's a lot of fields that are going to have to be re-turfed at the very least. Some will have to have some updates so that they'll meet the standards for the practice. So it's a big project that has a potential to leave a tremendous legacy in North America.
And I think that's a big key, is the legacy. This is the first time FIFA's, like Trey mentioned, is supporting research. So it's been an education going back and forth with the universities, working with FIFA, going down the road of, what they're investing in is, this is a big commitment, and it's going to leave a long-term effect of, we're going to identify some pretty new, not relatively new, but just different ways of establishing and performing and playing turf on grass, the soccer, and it with the sod, the big roll sod technologies that will be a legacy that could be going forward, that would leave options for potentials for these dome stadiums to have grass in them for other events, not just soccer.
So has that been the first step to look at basically sod production, knowing that there's going to be such a need for sod across such a wide geographic area, and ways to get the sod to be produced to do what you want it to do? Is that like the first foray into the work?
Well, we went to Nashville. The TPI was in Nashville in February, and John got us in the audience, or got us in to make a presentation. And we thought that there might be 10, 12, 15, 20 sod farmers in the room to listen to what we had, just because of the potential and what was going to happen. And I think there was about 300 people in the room from the sod industry. If you know anything about the sod industry, to get 300 people to do anything, particularly if there's nothing free about it, they're not coming. So it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and that's, Jim, you're right. It's going to come to, that's a lot of sod that needs to be produced. That's at the highest quality on sand-based sod. So that's going to be well drained, that could be level for sports fields. And like Trey said, there's 48 countries. So each country has a base camp, what they call a base camp, where they train. So they'll have 1 or 2 pitches or fields that they'll have to train on. So that right there is 48 times 2 pitches. That could be 96 different pitches for practicing for the national teams. Then the referees also have a base camp. So that's another 1 or 2 fields. So that could be 98 fields just there. Then the 16 stadiums, then each of the 16 stadiums has to have at least 2 fields for training, for pre-game training for teams coming into those trainings. So it's a lot of fields. I think we add up 154 sometimes when we count those numbers.
And to make your head spin even further, at least for the stadiums, right after that, the National Football League starts, so they may want new fields after that. So the pressure on the sod industry is going to be pretty high. And if I was a golf course needing sod, I'd probably buy mine pretty quick.
That's a pretty good message for many in the Southeast right now with the winter kill and delayed green up issues. I know that's on first and foremost on people's minds. So, knowing the geographic range, they're obviously not all going to play on warm season grass or cool season grass. It's going to be a little bit of both, right?
Right.
So then walk the audience through, you got to get them to play the same, right? Like, what does that mean? How do you determine if a Bermuda grass field in Miami and a bluegrass field in Massachusetts plays the same? How do you guys think you're going to go about doing that?
Well, I think what's going to happen is this is going to really allow the work that the University of Tennessee has been doing over the last half dozen or 10 years to really come to the forefront. Oftentimes you do work and you don't see that it'll come to fruition, or you don't see where it will pay off. But this is where it's going to pay off in spades right here, and that the work that John and Kylie Dixon have done and others is really going to pay off, because I think they're going to be able to quantify some of these differences and really make FIFA, they're going to make FIFA look good. That's what it's going to do.
Hey, John, do you have the map, the slide with the map of
I
all?
do. I do.
We both do. You want to bring it up, Trey? Go ahead.
Yep. What does you want, Brandon?
Well, I was just going to say, it'll give the audience a visual of like what this looks like across North America, right? And then when we think about these different stadiums and the different climatic regions, like I remember when you were working on the Olympics, we talked about, the weather in Beijing, for example, and how the summers were like, Tennessee, the winters were like Michigan. It spanned like multiple different climatic zones. And so like, that's what I was going to say. So 3 climatic zones, but when you think about like these indoor stadiums and things, like, are there more than 3 climatic zones in terms of the weather and the way these grasses will perform, or how do you think that will ultimately end up kind of playing out?
Well, we kind of think that because Dallas, Houston, and Atlanta are all in indoors with air conditioning, that they'll probably be a little similar. And SoFi, which is out there in Los Angeles, that one has no air conditioning at all. It's actually almost open to the air. But LA doesn't have any humidity, so I don't know what's going to happen there. So that's a good question. John's been to Vancouver. It's a relatively old stadium, but I think they put a lot of updates there. But we've been tossing around that Dallas and Houston will likely be playing on a cool season grass, Brandon.
Okay, because of the indoor and the climate control.
And the low light, and why do you want to heat things up inside for the Bermuda grass? You really don't.
Right.
So
Bermuda grass is already challenging in shade compared to bluegrass. So in a situation where it's 70 degrees, that's kind of good climate for bluegrass, blue rye mix, right? More than it would be Bermuda grass.
And when you
that's
guys
why
did
we
this
need
in
that's why we're waiting on our buildings to be built so we can do some of this. The other thing that I think was going to happen, and it's still a rumor out there, but I think that the 25 they're going to have in 2025 they're going to see a lot of test runs in a lot of these stadiums, because I think they're going to have a FIFA Club World Cup event, and the rumor is that you use a lot of these stadiums. So that too, Jim, will put a lot of pressure on the sod industry, because they'll bring it in and they'll take it back out again and probably won't reuse it.
And you talked, Trey, about, cool season turf and those dome stadiums in Dallas and Houston and Atlanta. And in 94, when you did this, Atlanta was probably a dome, but I don't remember. Was it the same where you were cool season turf there? Was it cool season turf across the board, or was there a split with warm season turf in 94, or how did that work?
Well, there were 9 sites, and there was only 3 dome stadiums in 1994. Houston, New Orleans, and Detroit. Everybody else was open air at the time. And so all these dome stadiums that people are aware of have been built since then. Los Angeles was Bermuda grass. New York City, which was also a temporary field that had been brought in, was also Bermuda grass. But the difference here, again, Jim, is that how fast or how long do you want this in for? It's one thing to tell somebody, well, we'll start putting it in February and the games will be in June, and bring us a bunch of lights and we'll keep the grass alive. That's very expensive. And then if you want to do it again in 2025, you're asking a stadium to throw away a lot of revenue for concerts and everything else. So what we've really been charged with is how to make this as simple and temporary as possible. And if we can be successful, that's simple and temporary and safe, but that's automatic. It's got to be successful. It's got to be safe. But if we can be temporary and we can be simple, then we have something to maybe offer some of these dome stadiums for other sports that we have, particularly the National Football League. So it's quite opportunistic. We've got a lot of opportunity. The other thing that's really exciting for us is that you just don't get this kind of research for sports turf very often, this level. When you're talking about 7-figure level research, it just doesn't happen very often for sports turf. So I think I speak for John, and I think I speak for all of the people that are working with this, is we feel a pretty good responsibility to, push things forward for the whole turf industry. And we're very excited about it.
It's definitely a huge endeavor and exciting to watch it happen. John, is there any particular part of what we've talked about that you think has you the most excited, in terms of whether it's the process of, getting the sod established close by to a location and having it available for a quick install? What part of it gets you the most excited?
Yeah, I think it's the orchestration of all of bringing this all together, because we're working with, you know, getting back to the sod production. We're looking at trying to get sod production in 3 countries as well. And so, you know, Mexico is a whole other one. So we have the language barrier. I think the biggest thing that gets me excited is the technicians and the graduate students and the undergraduates that we've got involved in this and the experience they're getting from it. Because I was in their seat, you know, 30 years ago doing this, and I never envisioned that I would be where I'm at as a professor at the University of Tennessee today. And it really all started from that opportunity to get to work on the '94 World Cup. And when that ended, John Steyer looked at myself and Brian Horgan and told us that we need to go to grad school. And we were both undergrads at the time, and you know, and we all know Brian Horgan as well, and been very successful, and he's at Michigan State now again. And I just think that's what gets me really excited, is what these next 2.5, 3 years are going to bring for all the students, but then the orchestration of putting on such a big event and being a part of that is the big part.
So how do you envision dividing and conquering, if you will? I mean, I imagine with such a big geographic footprint, there's got to be multiple visits to multiple locations. I mean, will you and Trey be working with, say, the sod producers, you know, from a pre-plant? Like, what's the pre-plant fertility look like? What's the weed control program and establishment look like? If there's disease issues that's being grown in, I mean, will it be granular down to that level of from when the grass is planted into install? Is that the workflow?
So, yes, but one of the things that you haven't mentioned yet is all of this sod will be grown on plastic. Okay, nothing is conventional. We don't envision any conventional sod at this point. So this is where a lot of our research is going, whether it be looking at species, composition, fertility, establishment. And it's, you know, what's challenging is there are several farms. When I say several, let's say there's 6 people that I think are pretty darn good at growing Sawdon Plastic. But we need 12. So that means you got to teach 6. And that's probably the biggest challenge right there, is teaching someone the intricacies of growing Sawdon Plastic, because there's a lot of things that are kind of counterintuitive. And it has a lot of challenges.
So let's go to school here, Trey. What are some of the things that are counterintuitive for growing Sawdon Plastic? Because my guess is a lot of the folks listening might not have any familiarity with Sawdon Plastic at all.
Well, the first thing that's counterintuitive is that you have a piece of plastic that you are growing your grass on, right? And so when you lay down an inch of sand, everything stops right there, whether that be the fertilizer or the roots. Or so this now means, particularly initially, as hard as grass is to establish initially, you can multiply it by 10. The other thing is that while you might think this grass will be 6, 8 months before, or 10 months before it's ready, it could be ready in 4. So these are things that are just not things that you would normally think about. So you have to wrap your mind around the fact that I have to think differently and you know, sod farm, you say, well, let's lay a piece of plastic out on a hard surface that I have prepared, that I want that surface to be so hard that I could drive a semi over. Now, where in agriculture do we do that?
You're talking about counterintuitive.
So this is just, it is just, you know, and the people that do it, and Chad Price at Carolina Green, Eric Holland at Precision Turf, the guy in Foley, Alabama, out West Coast, you know, there's a half a dozen, you know, but it's been quite challenging for them to get to that point. Now, I know there's a lot of great sod farmers out there that just haven't been asked to do that yet. But they're going to. And I think John was really wise to get us started there at TPI. I think they're coming up in July to Michigan, have another look around. So we're getting there. We're getting
So-
there, but it's about time to rock and roll.
So to that point, so how big is, John, remind me how big a soccer field is approximately?
You know, you've got about 68 meters wide, so, 75 yards wide by 110 yards long.
So 2 acres,
Yeah.
2.5 acres and 154 fields. So you need like almost 400 acres worth of production of sod on plastic. Today with those 6 growers, Trey, what's
200.
200? So about half. So like you were saying, so you need about 6 more people that are capable, or 6 more farms at the same level of production, at the same high level of product
Maybe more than
quality.
6, Brandon. Maybe
Right.
10, maybe 15. Who knows?
Right.
But
Yeah. Because you need about double the production that currently is produced. And that's annual production, about 200 acres.
yeah, that's a guess by me.
Right.
Yeah.
So then if you,
Largest sod farm's probably only 70.
right. And so then if you think about 2025 and 2026, then,
Yeah, 2025 won't need as many because it'll only be the
Right.
stadium.
right.
26 will be the 25 and 26 is where they'll be adding the. So
Yeah.
to the field.
Brandon, you also got to think about
All
all
you're
the-
really doing is making my head hurt.
Sorry.
Brandon, you got to think about all the NFL stadiums and college stadiums that do resoddings with the same stuff, with the same
Right.
sod.
Right.
And so-
Yeah.
That's a lot of inventory that needs to be produced.
Yeah. Because that's the other thing too, right? Is that this isn't happening in a vacuum where everybody else goes, hey, we don't need any sod.
Yeah.
You know,
Baseball, Major League Baseball.
That's
Yeah.
a lot of plastic. I mean, you think
Southeast
about that
Conference
much
uses a lot.
plastic over that much acreage. I mean, that's a lot of plastic.
Mhm.
Trey, you said something that got my curiosity up about faster establishment on plastic, that it might establish quicker. What is why would that be?
When you do get this inch of sand down and then you seed and then you get establishment, those roots go down to the plastic and then they start growing laterally, right? And as they grow laterally, they add strength. And so the maturity oftentimes for sod farmers is not what you see on top, it's what you see below, because they can't, quote unquote, use the term lift it. And so they have to wait till the rhizomes or the stolons are strong enough to lift. Now the roots are helping you lift. And so one of the studies that we have with one of our PhD students is looking at 100% ryegrass. Now just imagine that 100% ryegrass can now be a sod lifted and put into the game. All right. That was your old advisor who required that study to be done, Brandon. Hey, Dr. Vargas asked Jackie about a year ago. He says, I think you need to tell me how fast you can do 100% ryegrass. So she was quite excited. So was Dr. Vargas. I think it's just counterintuitive, Jim.
Yeah, because you wouldn't think ryegrass would be a viable sod option.
And it may end up saving us, because if all of a sudden I can do one in 10 weeks, how many fields can I do in that piece of plastic, Jim, in a year?
Well, and I got to think too, the weeds guy in me thinks that's a much cleaner establishment from a POA standpoint too, right? If you don't have the soil seed bank to deal with, you're bringing in sand on plastic, you're going to get a cleaner deliverable in the end from a weeds perspective, right?
Right.
Right.
Now, realize that this is nothing new. I mean, we've been, I don't know that let's just ignore the last debacle in Phoenix, but every grass field prior in the last 15 years has been on plastic. The World Cup that we did in 1994, that sod was grown on plastic. Now that's 32 years ago. So this is not new. It's just not widespread.
Is the transport of sod on plastic easier than conventional sod, or no different?
Probably no different. What's interesting, so what you want to keep your eye on, Jim, will be over the next couple of years is when you put the challenge, when you throw a gauntlet down to an industry, like we've kind of thrown the gauntlet down to this sod industry, they'll respond. Why? Because, right now we use 4-foot wide rolls. Well, somebody will say, well, why don't we use a 6-foot wide roll? Why don't we use an 8-foot wide roll? And because of what we're going to end up doing, I think you see these kinds of advancements, and they come during these times when you have these strong requirements. So I don't suspect that anything but the best from this industry, anything but the best.
Is the root zone going to be a prescribed type of root zone, or is it going to be, and is it going to be 100% sand or included with other soil elements or organic matter or any of those kinds of things?
Well, I can't say that they won't have some elements in them. The thing that I will say that it's going to be predominantly sand. You still have to have the rules, because ignoring the stadiums for now and just going to the practice fields, I have to have a sand base going over the top of anything so that I will not inhibit drainage at all. And so I can't have a layering, incompatible root zone. So that's automatic. Got to have that. And then second thing that you're going to have is the roots themselves will do a pretty good job initially of giving you that strength. But then we might need to put some stuff in some of these sod farms. But it's relatively simple, because you just bring it and then establish it and then top dress it up until you get to a 2-inch layer, and then you harvest it. I say you start with 1 inch, but then you quickly add that 2nd inch, and then you take it away. And there are people that do this very, very well, and you guys have been watching games on it for a long time. It's just getting ready to be in the common vernacular, I think.
Yeah. And Brandon, from the cool season standpoint, when you're establishing it from seed on plastic, an 85-15 and 80-20 mix sand peat by volume, you need that organic matter, because that moisture on that plastic is, it dries out really quick, and it's anything you can do to have that to aid the seed establishment is vital.
Right. And I know you guys have talked about it before, just with the audience that we have. I know FIFA, thinks very highly of some of these stitching systems and things like that. How will that stitching system type of inclusion work with something that's grown on plastic? Will it be done at the sod farm, or will it be done in the stadium, or once the sod is laid? How does that ultimately work out?
Yes.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yes. We're getting ready to experiment. Well, but some of the stadiums, the outdoor stadiums, could come in. Toronto's already got a stitched pitch, right? So, and
because they're the only one that's currently basically ready to go, right?
Right. If according to what FIFA requires, there's 3 things that they really want. There's a vacuum ventilation system, a way to take water in and out or provide air. Stitching or a hybrid system, whether it's a stitched or a carpeted system, but a hybrid reinforced root zone. And then the third is lights, having grow lights to aid and grow. And knowing that a lot of these stadiums, June and July, light isn't even limiting, maybe in San Francisco at Levi Stadium, but it's an opportunity, again, going back to that legacy, they've wanted lights for a long time. It's now a chance for them to have some lights that they can have in perpetuity for their, the legacy that's there.
But then here's the thing that will rub you a little bit, in that, if you have you take Philadelphia or anybody up there that, okay, we got to have stitching in those fields, but then they don't want stitching in their fields when the NFL starts. So do you rip it back out? And that stitching oftentimes goes 7 or 8, 10 inches deep and kind of hard to pull out. So how exactly are we going to do that? So that's part of the reason why we're trying to investigate, in addition to offering the carpeting system that would just be a blanket that you would grow the grass up through, which is very simple and actually makes it easier to grow Sawdon plastic, in my opinion. Or would you come in with the stitcher while the sod was still in the farm and do what's called a shallow stitch, which this is something that stitching industry has not done yet. They have not mastered that, so to speak. And so we're right on the edge with that. As you both researchers know, the cutting edge can get quite bloody. So
Yeah, for sure.
no.
Yeah,
And then with that, so then with the stitching system, then of those three elements, right? The lights, the vacuum drainage, sub-air type system, and the stitching. What of those three? What's the most important one you think? What's the one that you could live without if you had to? Like, what are the?
Well, where are we? Right? Are we in New York outside? Or are we in Miami? Or are we in Atlanta? So
Right.
this is why John and I have, from the very start, our heads have been spinning about this for, it's 18 months. But it's an a la carte thing. And that was what was so amazing when we went to Qatar. John had already been there, but I went over there with him in November. It was cookie cutter. I mean, they had a great World Cup. I'm not talking about that. The field played fine. Everything was growing wonderful. Got all great. But it was the same thing over and over and over. And it's like, we're not going to have any two stadiums that match up. Period.
Right.
Yeah, you think, Brandon, June and July in Miami, there's good chance there's going to be a rainstorm every day at 3:30 rolling in. And so
Right.
A vacuum ventilation system would probably be pretty good to pull moisture out, and
Right.
So
But
In a dome stadium on a flat surface with a underlayment of some sort of padding to attenuate the concrete so that the ball plays properly and all that kind of stuff. How do you have a vacuum ventilation system in that?
great question. Great question. These are all good questions. And then you ask, do you really need a vacuum ventilation system? Because is it going to rain in there? Yes or no, it's probably not. But what if somebody accidentally overwaters and you got to pull it out? I'm just telling you what FIFA, these are the requirements that they keep talking about. So
Right.
they don't like to leave anything to chance. And once they decided to get in charge, this is what they deal with. So yeah, does Bermuda grass even needs to be stitched? That's another good question, right? Good question.
There's
Speaking
a
of questions, we got a couple of audience questions. One of them, and this was a question I had too while you guys were chatting. How do you harvest Sawdon plastic? Is it the same harvesting equipment to go in and lift that stuff?
It's actually, very similar, but the nice thing is about harvesting Sawdon plastic, and you'd asked this question, is there a difference between conventional sod? And the nice thing about it is you're cutting it like a pizza. You're not cutting it from below. You're not shearing any roots off. But they do pick it up and put it on a conventional harvester that can pull it up, but you're not shearing any roots, and then it rolls up like big roll sod normally would.
With the plastic on it?
No,
You
plastic's
take it
left.
off the plastic. You cut it off and just pick it up off the plastic.
So the only cutting happens for the long strip, not underneath. You're not
You're not
shearing
cutting
anything underneath, and then you just basically put it on the roll and then use the harvester to roll it up.
Right. And then when you go lay the sod, this was work, what we saw back in 92 when we sodded the modules in the Silver Dome. Within 30 days, you got these fully intact roots, and then gravitropism or gravity, those roots are going down. And that plant is not having to, like conventional sod where you've cut the roots off, use all that energy to grow new roots. They're just growing with gravity down. That's what roots do. And so that enables the plant to be more healthier, more durable, and ready, more mature.
And so
That
now,
diminishes the shock, right?
right. And so now The big question is, how durable will this plant be indoors without necessarily even putting it into a rooting system? Can we feed it? Can we water it? Will it be able to absorb that? The answer so far is yes. So, I have an experiment going right now in Florida where, we threw Bermuda grass overseeded with ryegrass into a garage, and 11 weeks later, it still looks like it's still alive and kicking. Done nothing to it except open up the doors every once in a while. So we're into some new territory here.
Yeah, for sure. There's another question that came in. Do you foresee this changing the dynamics of most sod farms in their growing process going forward and changing the operational standards on how sod production is done?
That'll all come down to demand. How much of these stadiums are going to be requiring this on a bigger issue, but the ability to grow sod, on plastic, and like Trey had said, with the 100% ryegrass, well, and in 10 weeks you can turn it around. What about the tall fescue belt? The tall fescue is another bunch type grass. Instead of using the netting, why not establish tall fescue and it could be even for home lawns, but like a composted organic or home lawn medium on plastic. You can grow tall fescue sod on plastic and have every 10 weeks rotating a new crop on a field. That's a tremendous way to do it, especially in local or smaller areas to urban areas. So I think that's where we might see changes.
5 years ago, I wrote a grant and it wasn't funded. Sometimes a little ahead of our time, but because I said, well, I'd like to use the parking lots of these old malls to grow Sawdon Plastic in these urban areas. And then every spring have something for them to come back the truck up and get it. And what would that, because we're not using any soil from agriculture or anything along those lines, but it wasn't funded. But this is what the spinoff of here. You'll see this kind of stuff happen.
Well, in going back to the weed control front, I mean, if you have a cleaner deliverable and you're not bringing that soil seed bank along with you, there's a market out there for that to be sold across, outside of sports turf, just in sod in general. I mean, we have plenty of golf courses that have undergone regrassing or renovation in this region that are dealing with some new weed issues and new disease issues. Brandon, I got to think there's some soil pathogens that might come along with sod, along with POA seed and goosegrass seed and all the rest of it. And if we can have a
bluegrass weevil,
a protocol that keeps that cleaner, I could see it changing.
Yeah, it seems to me that the spin-offs of being able to produce a significant quantity of Sawdon plastic has applications, to Jim's point, golf courses, regrassing a green surface where typically you don't think of sod being the ideal way to do it. That if you had a clean root zone that root zone matched up with the root zone that you had in place, and you could go in, you could change over a green surface very, very quickly with minimal disruption to play, really.
Yeah, see, that's the other thing we haven't really talked about, Jim and Brandon, is the instant playability of Sawdon Plastic. And that is because you're preparing it on a flat surface, you're controlling the top dressing, you're giving yourself a very, very smooth surface. Whenever you cut conventional in a sod farm, you all know that as good as a job as a thing does, it still comes in a little uneven, a little bumpy, and it's got to be top dressed. So really what we're doing with this is we're putting all the pressure on the sod farm to deliver a playable field to the stadium or to the area. And that'd be the same thing that you're talking about for the putting green. And that's one of the reasons why they would just love it. One of the things we haven't talked about is the price. Sawdon Plastic is about a 10x over conventional right now. But that's because of the market. I mean, who knows what it'll be, could it be eventually? But
and Brandon, I've been thinking about this a long time, all the way back to my master's. If you remember, I did my master's degree was growing Sawdon Plastic, and in another century, let's just say. But I've been thinking about this a long time. I've worked with a lot of golf courses, and some golf courses that come in. Why couldn't they have a nursery of Sawdon Plastic and they grow it? And it's not so much for the greens, but the driving range tee, the par 3 tee boxes, you got these golf courses that have really small driving range tees that get beaten up and they're always hitting off the mats. But if you've got an area or a parking lot where you're growing Sawdon Plastic, and you can come in and Trey says it's instantly playable, they're hitting off it the next day. That's pretty good. And with the technology coming in with a coralling off, putting out the big roll sod, putting it up, you can do that, sidekick it in a couple hours.
This is why the students are, if they're listening to this right now, the graduate students, the technicians, this is their research. One thing is to apply it to what we're getting ready to do for the World Cup. The second thing is to be able to kick it forward as we move down and leave the World Cup after 2026.
Yeah, for sure. Another question that came in, how are damaged sections of sod on plastic changed on the field? Is it fixed the same way as regular sod would be?
Yeah, I mean, you just go and cut it out. If you had a damaged area, you'd need to go. If you had to fix it, if that had to be done. Now, if it's a stitch system or something like that, you've got to be careful how you take it out. But the system would be is.
I think they removed some stuff in Qatar and put it back in and stitched it. They had some small stitching units, so they that kind of thing has been thought up and being used right now in Europe, I think, in some areas.
Yeah. And then the lessons are to be learned, a lot of it is accessibility to these stadiums during World Cup and things like that, because there's the LED boards and media. So being able to have equipment to get in and renovate something that if there was needed, it could be done. And that's Alan Ferguson with FIFA has been thinking about all these as he's learned the last 2 World Cups that he's done.
And that's a name that United States turf industry will hear a lot over the next few years. And he's a fantastic individual, Alan Ferguson. And he kind of is head of FIFA's pitch management team. And from England, John's friend, but
from Scotland.
England. He's now mad at me. But fantastic individual. And John and I are lucky to work with him only because most of the time when you're working with these big entities, you don't have that person immediately above you that's a turf person, but this person is. So that's been important.
Trey, you mentioned the grad students that are involved. Is foreign language part of the degree program now? Because I got to think with the diversity of geography you're going to go to and the training that's going to have to be done. I mean, there's going to be some language barriers, right, that are going to have to be crossed in order to get the growers in all different parts of the world to follow the protocols that you're developing.
Well, we have 2 research technicians. We have Ryan Beers at Michigan State and Reese Fielder at the University of Tennessee. And John can comment on this, but Reese Fielder is leading a team of Tennessee and Michigan State students down to Mexico. And how many Spanish-speaking people are on that team, John?
2. Yeah.
So we have 2, and then we have a couple of others that are novices, but everybody's just going to pick up, I think.
Well, and then what about you talked in the beginning about 48 countries and each with a training pitch and the referees that have their own pitch. I mean, is the growth of sod going to happen in those 48 countries too, or just the geographical footprint where the actual World Cup will happen?
Well, you have 48 countries, right, that are coming here. And their expectations are to play. Now, what kind of field that they have, what they're coming off of is a completely different story. But we're just focusing right now on the fields that we need to get ready. We can talk about the fact that there'll be another World Cup in 2030. There'll be a Women's World Cup in 2027, and we hear all kinds of rumors about involvement in that. But one of us is getting a little older. So I don't know how much longer I'll be around for all that stuff.
And that's for our YouTube viewers to guess which one.
I'm getting older too.
We're all getting older.
We're all getting older every minute. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to put up our GCSAA points. And then again, this is only for golf course superintendents. This has nothing to do with pesticide accreditation, but for those that are interested in GCSAA, CEUs from the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America. This is your event approval code right here that you will enter into the GCSAA website. If you are watching this on YouTube as a recording, you want to make sure that when you enter it, you put today's event date. And those that may be listening to this via podcast, if you need this information, you can email me and I will send it to you for upload at that time. But I will leave this here for a few minutes while to go back in the day from the sports reporters for any parting shots that you might have. But before we do that, we have one more question here. Do you see any pushback from environmental agencies due to the amount of plastic being used with this method of growing sod? Could that be one reason why growing sod on plastic isn't as prominent as it is? Any thoughts on that before we segue out, gentlemen?
Well, the plastic can be reused. And so that part, does have that potential. And then at the same time, I think that once you begin to, you have to think about this, and from a standpoint of this is the initial way we're doing this. And if we can just somehow get sod on an impermeable layer, does it have to be plastic? And all of us have done enough research to know how things start and how they end up at the end of it. So that's a very good question. And I do think it'll change down the road.
Or you could envision just right off the top of my head, it's interesting that you say that, Trey. I mean, it just popped into my head, like, why couldn't you have a stadium surface or a sod production surface that's capillary concrete? Right. Like, and you have in a stadium, if you had capillary concrete or permeable concrete, then you could have a drainage system that's there that you could roll out other surfaces across the top, and whether that's a grass surface for sports, and then you roll it up and put a hard surface over it for some other event, and then come back, but you have that.
I mean, Las Vegas and all these new stadiums that are coming on, don't be surprised.
Right. And then certainly for a production standpoint, like you were saying about old malls, you could very easily envision, areas that are used for production that have this permeable surface that's not plastic per se, but is some other surface that allows you to, cut the sod horizontally and then roll it up and start again. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and Brandon, that's, that's exactly what they do in Singapore. It's, they've got 3 pitches for their national stadium that I've worked with for the last 5-6 years, and they're on concrete. They're not on plastic. So they're on an impermeable layer. And that was like when Trey and I were at TPI in Nashville with all the sod producers. They're like, can we stop calling it sod over plastic? Because they don't like the word plastic, the sod producers, at all. They're like, can we just come up with another name, not sod on plastic or sod? It's like sod over an impermeable layer, it's like that, or barrier.
Sure.
Because it doesn't, it could be whatever, for sure.
Yeah, because
we need a new name. We'll call it Sorokin turf or something. That'd be
and you could easily see we already have bunkers that have capillary concrete and others, liners in them. You could easily see that sand being there, and then just having a grass surface on top of it. You top dress up, you pick it up, roll it up, and off you go again. Right.
Right. Yeah. You just have to worry about whether or not it roots into it, but there's still, it's a lot of good questions.
Like all good research projects, they lead to more research, right?
Amen.
Well, let's leave it. Well, I was going to leave it there, but we got one more question. Says, how about hydroponic turf? Is that something that we could do for the World Cup? My guess is probably no.
Probably not. No, not the way all the work we've done on hydroponics, but it's a good way to do research on things. But
that'd be a really big hydroponic container for the amount of acreage you need.
And the price is probably low for what hydroponic would run you.
Well, and the trick to this whole thing, what we didn't mention was, all of these stadiums that are in the United States, they're not soccer stadiums. They're NFL football stadiums. So that means they're having to be retrofitted. So And the idea here is to not see how much money you can spend, but how little money you can spend and
Right.
get the. So the idea of bringing the Sawdon plastic, putting it on a shallow profile in these 8 stadiums that don't have grass. We know we could do a modular field. That's simple. But it's expensive. So the question is, can you use this big roll technology, Sawdon plastic, and answer this question without breaking the bank?
And keeping that shallow profile, as Trey mentioned, so you don't lose a row of seats, because that's a lot of those, because those are the expensive seats, club level, field level club seats and things like that. You could come in with a modular system, but then all of a sudden your sight lines have changed and you lose the front row seats.
Probably should have said that at the beginning of the podcast, but kind of a rookie.
Yeah.
We got we had one of our extension colleagues here, an agent from Middle Tennessee, share with us at the end. He's the branding for Sawdon Plastic moving forward. The word soil is an acronym for sod over impermeable layer, which I thought was pretty clever.
Beautiful.
Let's leave it there, gentlemen. I appreciate the time and you joining our show today. We'll let everybody get off to lunch. We will be back the first week of June for a discussion about diseases and disease control. Dr. Horvath's going to play QB1 on that. So until next time, enjoy the rest of your day.